Welcome to a very special edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with the author of the UNESCO City of Music, Kansas City, Anita Dixon, and the Mayor Pro Tem of Kansas City, Scott Wagner. Both Scott and Anita spoke at length about how the UNESCO designation came about, what it means, the historical significance of jazz in Kansas City, and so much more. Both were very illuminating conversations, and they had great insights into this honor, our city, jazz, and so much more. So please, dig this interview, my friends.
Anita, thank you again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on Neon Jazz. We always have different capacities that we talk in, but I think the resounding notion between us is that we love jazz, we love Kansas City, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you on the show.
Thank you so much, Joe. I enjoy it. You're doing well, dude. Keep it up.
Thank you. And the one thing that's always wonderful with when we discuss things is there's always good news. You're always bringing something special to the Kansas City jazz community. And with UNESCO, this is a pretty big honor. So what I want to do is I want to start off and ask, how did this come about? Talk to me about the origins of this pursuit and just kind of how it unraveled to today.
Well, it came about, literally out of the necessity of having to get the Mutual Musicians Foundation and the jazz in the community in a position where we would have an opportunity to work internationally, right? And there's always that kind of opportunity, but this was the ultimate opportunity. I first started looking at Kansas City segregated district for the jazz as a World Heritage Site under UNESCO, which we do still plan on doing. But the thing Creative Cities came up. And as I was looking at the Creative Cities criteria and the interaction international, that this is the thing that will set us apart, and give us an opportunity to revive and work with people on an international basis. And, the International Day of Jazz is a huge thing now. So I figured if we could get a UNESCO designation, that would put us in a much better position to research, to educate people on the Kansas City style of jazz, to expand tourism, and and give the entertainment value and the musicians a greater profile. You know what I mean? So we started going after it, and that's me and Jacob Wagner and Scott Wagner, Mayor Pro Tem, because Jacob Wagner from UMKC had just finished a extensive research study on the musicians and the neighborhood, Wendell Phillips neighborhood, but the musicians of Local 627. Do you know they identified every musician that ever belonged to Local 627? And where they were born, their birthday, when they died, when they entered Local 627, it was the most, where they lived was the most important thing, because that sparked getting a rocket grant from the Charlotte Foundation, which had us to meet Henrik Iverson from the Ben Webster Foundation in Copenhagen. I go to Copenhagen and find this tremendous jazz scene around Ben Webster. And I mean, when I say tremendous, come on, really? The music there was incredible as a tribute. So the reason for the UNESCO was to expand on that, to make it a greater opportunity, not just for the city and everything, but for our musicians, particularly worldwide. So it's been something, to say the least.
Scott, thank you for taking a minute out to talk with Neon Jazz about this very exciting distinction that Kansas City has gotten from UNESCO. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Love to talk about it.
So let's go ahead and let's start with the outfit here and kind of work our way to today. Talk to me about how this designation came into place and just kind of the process, so to speak.
There was a team of folks who really worked on this. Anita Dixon, Jacob Wagner at the Center for Neighborhoods at UMKC, the city, kind of putting the official request to UNESCO. But really what it boils down to in a lot of ways is doing your homework and asking. And by doing your homework, I mean that in order to be viewed as a city of music by UNESCO, you really have to show the connections that were made from Kansas City to places all over the world. And in particular, I think what we were able to show significantly through our research and the research done by UMKC was just how those artists who were here in Kansas City, and particularly in the 18th and Vine area, made their way not only all over the country, but also made their way into Europe. So whether it was in London, Paris, Copenhagen, that sound that was coming out of Kansas City was making its way and diffusing to other parts of the world. And because we were able to show that, then we were able to make the case and essentially ask UNESCO to give us this designation. And I make it kind of sound simple, but there was years of work to show that not only was the history there, but that Kansas City was still keeping its jazz roots relevant. And, we were able to show that convincingly, and we were fortunate to get the designation. And it's a designation now that no other city has, and no other city in the United States is going to get in the near future.
So one thing that always strikes me about your work and the work that continues to happen to bring good things to Kansas City is that the Kansas City jazz machine is probably stronger than ever right now. I mean, we have the echoes of Charlie Parker and 18 and Vine, but we have very real cats from Ernest Melton to all of these other younger cats, Bobby Watson at the university. There's so much going on, and people are staying in Kansas City. So my question is this. Why will Kansas City continue to be relevant? Why is it that we continue to get these awards? Talk to me about the culture that makes Kansas City jazz strong.
That's never going to be taken from us, no matter what people may think about what's happening with the American Jazz Museum and what's happening with these different factions back and forth. The history, the preservation of that history is our most important contribution to humanity. And that can never be taken from us. And every generation finds its way to this music. It finds its way to the music of Jay McShann and Ben Kennard and, Sonny Kenner. It finds its way. And when it finds its way, that's what it is. It found its way in Copenhagen with Benny Webster. It finds its way in Russia. It finds its way in Japan. There's nothing that can be taken away from Kansas City or the culture. The most important cultures surrounding jazz is this 100-year history of this place called Local 627. The spirits that surround that, and you know me, I sincerely believe that the spirits that surround that, there's never going to be anything that's not synonymous with Kansas City. We're solidified in that. And that's what made the UNESCO designation one of the most important, because who could dispute it? Not even the international people could dispute that we are who we are. I'm quite proud of it, personally.
To put it mildly, no good deed goes unnoticed, and the seismic ramifications of a designation like this is going to have to reverberate for years and even decades. Talk to me about the impact of this designation on Kansas City.
Well, it's a stage that is pretty darn unique and provides us an opportunity to tell our story to a worldwide audience. And that has ramifications for tourism. It has ramifications for development. It has ramifications for historic preservation. And I think what is really incredible is, we're now part of a group of 180 cities worldwide that have some sort of UNESCO designation, whether it is in music or literature, gastronomy, which is food for those who don't follow that kind of terminology, literature, all these areas of culture and the arts that we're now linked to, and they're linked to us. And I think that's what provides us such an incredible opportunity to raise Kansas City jazz, to raise Kansas City, and to raise this region in a way that is so unique and that I think will present so many opportunities for us culturally, business-wise, education-wise. I'm excited, and I hope the listeners out there who are learning about this are excited too, because it's a stage that no other city has, and we have that through our jazz heritage.
You know, the one thing about this designation is that this will reverberate very well for years and decades to come. How significant is this designation, and how will this affect the future of Kansas City jazz and our plight as a city in keeping that torch going?
We're going to get a chance to interact with 19 other countries who are cities of music, as we are. Jamaica, London, China, Mexico. These are places that each and every one of them were hit in some way by the diaspora of the American enslavement period. Okay? That's our entree. That is who and what will make this special. That's what will make this enduring. In our application, they asked us in the application, what would make what we're doing different from others? And the answer was something we created in the application that's to be done by the end of 2020 is something called the Voyage of the Drum. The Voyage of the Drum is going to be an actual demonstration of the creation process of jazz. You're going to be able to hear the sights and sounds, well, not the sights, but the sounds of how jazz, this thing we call Kansas City jazz, coalesced, right? You're talking about the hulls of the slave ships and the sounds of gospel and the sounds of the Delta and the blues and the folk music that arose out of this, and then all of a sudden it emerges into a 20th century phenomena that hit Kansas City and the 20s and the 30s and the Art Deco era and the World War. All of these things coalesced into this thing called jazz. And what's the most perfect place in the world to witness all of this was in the Kansas City, and particularly in the state of Missouri. W.C. Handy, Scott Joplin. All of those things are the history of jazz, and we have encompassed all of it and ended it up in Kansas City. You're going to be able to take a tour of Kansas City and hear those sights and sounds during this very, very unique jazz festival that we are planning. And this very unique jazz festival will take you from one end to the other in the music of the enslavement period, the gospel, the blues, and the various things, and then all of a sudden you're going to find yourself on 18th and Vine and hearing how all that music all came together into a new art form in humanity. It's going to be very exciting, and it's a figure of study in Europe, the Voyage of the Drum.
The one thing about Kansas City jazz is you go from Count Basie to Charlie Parker and all those early days from 18 and Vine all the way to now, which I would consider us in another level of renaissance. With Bobby Watson, a lot of cats are staying here. This is this isn't just a launching pad anymore. This is a place where people make a living and really hone their craft and continue to develop this Kansas City jazz sound. So my question is this: why is Kansas City jazz such a timeless entity that continues to stay relevant, like with this designation that we have?
Well, I guess from my perspective, it is an art form that is born of change. It invites it. It invites people to come to it. It invites, complementary musical forms, whether, it's gospel or blues or whatever. So many genres of music plug into jazz. And that, I think, continues and keeps it relevant. And like you said, I think we have there's that old adage of what is old is new again. And I think it describes this renaissance that you mentioned that, as people refine the art form, it takes them into directions that they never thought possible and invites a whole new number of artists to discover it and make it a part of their performance. And so, the very foundation of jazz, I think, is what allows it to become new again and invites people to it. And I guess, the other thing I would say as you talk about that renaissance is, jazz is something that we have if you will, been selling as part of Kansas City's history for a long, long time. You know, when we talk about Kansas City and why is it a city to learn about and to know, you know, one of the first things we talk about is jazz. And so I think this designation really invites all of us to take ownership of the art form, to push the art form, to support the art form, and to bring that art form to a whole new number of audiences. And I think that's special.
The one thing that always gets me about what you do and how you've worked so well in this town to bring jazz to the forefront is I think there's a notion with people that jazz just is because of the history of Kansas City from the early days, and it's just a cloud that's going to be in the sky that's going to be there no matter what anybody does. But I don't think that's the case with what you do, bringing a radio station here, bringing this designation. Well, my question to this is, what would you say to people that think that just things come to Kansas City and don't understand the work that goes into it? Because there's a lot of work that goes into maintaining that status of Kansas City being a jazz town.
I tell people that if you're not taking care of the musicians, if all of this is the smoke and mirror of events and, you know, a festival for a festival's sake, and there's no real thought put into what the musicians need or what the musicians want or the music that needs to be played, then it's all for naught. You know, that's our lifeblood right there. And regardless as to what anybody thinks about how I think about it or what's going on about it, that is the deal. The training, the understanding, the reverence for the music, that comes from the people who play it, you know. And I think it's very, very important that this city's officials and people like that understand that when we take care of the musicians, the music will take care of itself. Because those who grow their lives to be musicians, that's their thing. And then all of a sudden they decide they want to be jazz musicians, and that's their thing. Even though, you know, all the Spotifys and Pandoras and everybody are telling you, oh, do this, because there's no money in that. There's no money in that. Then what's in it? And what's in it? And that's humanity's thoughts and the acceptance of jazz as a universal language as much as a smile. That's what's in it. So if that's in it for the musician, then it's got to be something in it for people like me who don't play, but have a reverence for the history and for the promotion of that. This is a soul operation. This is not a just, okay, let's just go play for jazz's sake. Like I heard one of these people say who were in a big position say, well, jazz is jazz, right? I'm like, how far away from this could you possibly be? Yes, yeah. Jazz is jazz, but jazz is the humanity's language. Somehow it reaches everybody. Somehow it makes sense to everyone. And it's what we here in Kansas City hang our hat in history on. You know, it's very important.
So you're getting ready to take this Kansas City Jazz torch to Poland, and you're going to go and spread it. Talk to me about the trip that's coming up and what the future is for your activity with Kansas City.
We actually had our first opportunity to take it on the road, so to speak, in Hanover, Germany. And we brought the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra there to their Swinging Hanover event. 51 years with over 40,000 people participating in that event, and it was the first time that we brought Kansas City Jazz to that event. And it was a very exciting opportunity because that city, in addition to being one of our sister cities, is also a UNESCO City of Music. And so coming into Poland in June, this is really our opportunity to introduce ourselves to all of the cities in the UNESCO system, and an opportunity to have come in already showing that we are taking this designation seriously and we're creating partnerships and opportunities. And what I'm hoping is, you know, we'll learn a little bit more about everyone's expectations as far as what you must do as one of these UNESCO cities. But I think being able to walk in and say, we're already creating partnerships, we're already doing things with other cities within this network, I think allows us an opportunity to find and hopefully create some partnership opportunities almost immediately and come back home from this trip in Poland and know, here's what we're doing here, here's what we're doing here, here's how we're bringing other cities to Kansas City. That's what's exciting. There's a little bit of the unknown, but I think we're already building a track record on the notion that we're going to do some things to elevate Kansas City and Kansas City jazz internationally.
You know, the one thing I think that's important to understand about this designation with Kansas City and jazz is that jazz musicians come from the soul, like you said. They're humble, and there's a humanity that goes into it. They're going to do it no matter what, because they're not doing it for the money. They're doing it because they want to live their lives playing the music they believe in. Do you think that's kind of the backbone of getting this UNESCO designation?
That's literally the backbone of the designation. Those that are playing now stand on the shoulders of those that came before them. And I could not have written this had those who not come before them influenced the ones who are playing now. Okay, and that's everywhere around the world. Okay, and that's not just in Kansas City. Those are musicians that are playing all around the world that recognize this music for what it is. We looked on the Spotify data and found out that over 1 million people a month are listening to Kansas City jazz in Mexico, in Amsterdam, in those places. So all of those people contribute to what is a money maker or not a money maker. It's up to us people, like, us business folks, so to speak, to turn it into something economically. And that's the other thing about the UNESCO designation. This is supposed to be another part of urban sustainability. If people will work with us and understand what this UNESCO designation really is, it's not just an opportunity to do festivals and, things. It's a chance to take the creative aspect of humanity and turn it into an economic driver for those who occupy the big cities. Pretty soon, there's going to be more cities in the world than there's going to be rural areas and farm areas and things like that, and that's beginning to be that. What's going to happen to the urban thought? What's going to happen to that creativity? It must be preserved. So within that situation, here comes an economic driver that nobody looked at as an economic driver until we received this UNESCO designation. And that's why we're going to Poland, to accept the award and then to find out what more is being done all over the world to change the lives of poor people and people who want to own businesses through creativity. Kansas City is one of the leading cities in the nation for cultural art being an economic driver. That was one of the positive things of this application that we were able to put in there. We're one of the leading ones. Arts, fine arts, movies, film, gastronomy, events. We're one of the leading. Made for a good application, I'll tell you that.
I think that's a great way to wrap everything up. Anita, thank you for your tireless efforts for Kansas City Jazz. It always comes into fruition, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you about what's going on and where we're going as a city.
Hey, stay tuned, dude.
That's right. That's the word. Scott, hey, thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule. Thank you for pushing the Kansas City Jazz torch further. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Europe, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to both Anita and Scott for their tireless devotion to jazz in Kansas City. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.